Well, what's begin there, guys? Brian here at 3 Tyrone to another episode of the People's Questions, episode 244. We got a pretty standard episode this time with a few newbies, so jumping right into it, I'm going with the hardest question. Coming from a regular of mine, going by the name of... Sorry, I'm a little bit paused for the moment. Mr. M. Keller, who seems to always have a tendency to throw really difficult questions that I have to really think about and analyze before I can give a coherent answer. So, forgive me for saying this. So, your question is this. Which origin story is more interesting to me? A soldier that wakes up from a cryo tank and finds out he's been out for 7 years and he is saved by his old squad mates, but finds out she is working for the enemy and he must work under them in order for him to live. Or a soldier has gone away after his brother has died, making her an enemy to both armies, but once her squad mates find her, she is enforced back into the conflict. Why can't you give me anything simple? I guess the first one sounds, simpler to me. It'd be the equivalent of, I don't know, being an American soldier in 1941 and then waking up 7 years later finding out the Nazis won and now you have to join the Nazis in order if you want to live. That sounds simpler. I can't even really understand the second part, so I guess I will go with the first one as the more interesting origin story because it's much more simpler to understand. I mean, that's not a bad thing, but, you know, personally, I like interesting stories, but I like them even more when they're simple and easy to follow. Once you start adding all these extra things, it becomes a little bit more complicated, and that kind of pushes me away from that kind of stuff. So going to the much simpler questions, the first one comes from Richard. I can't say your last name, so I'm not going to try, but I'll leave it just right there. And you want to know, what are my opinions on the PlayStation 4 Pro? I'm not impressed. Okay, it's slightly more powerful than the PlayStation 4, big deal. But I own 3 of them here. I've bought a 4th one for my brother, so in terms of PlayStation 4s, I'm good for the next 10 years. I don't need to buy the PlayStation Slim or the PlayStation Pro. If they still play PlayStation 4 games, that's all I need. I'm fine. I mean, I don't need, a slightly more advanced processor to make the games look a little bit better. I don't need that. Trust me, I'm just fine with my games the way they are. They still look great. Next question comes from Tanuki Player, and you want to know, what are my thoughts on the recent Mass Effect Andromeda trailer? Well, it's a good trailer. I don't think we saw too much gameplay from it or learned anything new that we didn't already expect. But yeah, I'm pumped up to play it. When I get a chance to pre-order it, I certainly will. And I can't wait to play the next Mass Effect adventure in the franchise. I'm pumped up for it. Next question comes from Matt Cruz, and you want to know, have I ever been on a sports team before, like baseball or football? No, but looking back on it, I kind of feel like maybe I should have tried. Back in high school, it would have been high school. I think the reason I didn't try sports is because at the time I had this mentality, and in some sports I still do, that if you're not at least 6 foot tall or 6'2", you shouldn't be playing sports. The only 2 sports I would have tried playing is maybe basketball or football. And I feel like I might have done a little bit better in football. Basketball, it would have been suicide. I mean, I'm 5'8". So playing basketball would have just been a disaster. I mean, I'm not saying you can't be 5'8" and still be successful in basketball. You certainly can. But you're just at such a catastrophic disadvantage because guys are like 6'2", or even freakishly like 6'7", have such an advantage over you. It's almost painful to watch. Football would have been a little bit easier for me to do, but again, I wasn't 6 foot tall or 6'2". And I think if there was a position I could have played, I might have made I think I could have been a pretty good running back, or if not, maybe a receiver. Maybe a wide receiver. I think those would have been the 2 positions I could have done. But again, I wasn't 6 feet tall, so I didn't feel like I could do it. And I still don't think I could do it now. I don't know, there's some receivers that aren't, but I just feel like I kind of need the physical body in order to play those kinds of sports. I mean, if I'm playing with just my friends, then it's not a big deal. But if I was serious about wanting to be an athlete, then I would have wanted that advantage, to possibly help me out, but I didn't. So that's kind of what kept me out of sports from when I was in school. But I was more of a studies person than an athlete. The next question comes from Michael Beeland, and you want to know which character in the Metal Gear Solid universe do I think is the most skilled at CQC? Without question, it's Big Boss. Throughout the franchise, there's only 4 characters that are really proficient, or 4 main characters that are proficient with CQC, and that's the Boss, Big Boss, Liquid Snake, and Solid Snake. Solid Snake doesn't really like to use CQC, and he only started using it in Metal Gear Solid 4. Liquid Snake was probably very skilled with it, but again, he didn't really use it too much. And Big Boss and the Boss are the creators of CQC, and Big Boss beat the Boss using CQC. And he had another 10 to 15 years to improve it over time before Solid Snake took him out. So he obviously would be the master of CQC. And heck, this is even shown in Metal Gear Solid 4 when he was an old elderly man. I mean, he was like at least 70 or 80 years old, and he was still able to kind of take down or strip Solid Snake's gun from him. So if he can do that at that age, that says a lot. So he's the quintessential master of CQC throughout the entire franchise. Next question is a long one coming from That Napping Sniper, and you want to know, if I could pick what sci-fi game would I turn into a movie, and how would I make the plot fresh from the original source? Would I add new characters? Also, would I make the movie where the story tells more of the action pack, or what rating would I give it? If there was a sci-fi movie sci-fi video game I would like to make into a movie, it's without question Dead Space. Would I make changes? Absolutely. I would probably have Isaac have maybe 1 or 2 other companions with him. You can't make a movie with just him wandering around the Ishimura. You would have to have a group of people. Would I have it flesh out more of the story? Perhaps. The Dead Space 1 is more of an in-the-moment type of story, and you find out what happened to the Ishimura in the colony at Aegis 7 through audio logs and through video logs. That's really how the story is told. You're not really told what the story is in the moment. You kind of play the game and understand what the situation was before you got there. So I guess you could alternate the story a bit to make it much more in the moment than what happened. But those are just the changes that I would make. I would just simply have more characters. I mean, I would do the same thing for like a God of War movie. You can't just have it be Kratos by himself. You have to throw companions. He can't just be by himself. In terms of what rating I would give it, it would have to be rated R. You simply could not tell a good Dead Space story without it being rated R. I mean, it'd be the same thing with something like Aliens. You take away that hard R element of it, and it would really lose a lot of its best and more creepier scenes. And I think that's the question in a whole. So the next question comes from Hydra Blood 881. And you want to know, given Big Boss and Salt Snake's level of skills with CQC respectively, do you think that it would work against a Jedi or a Sith? If so, which one do you think would have a chance against? No, CQC probably wouldn't work against a Jedi because A, they have a lightsaber. Especially Masters, you're not stripping them of their lightsaber. They have the Force, which that alone is a serious issue, and they just don't have the capabilities to deal with a Jedi. I mean, they've dealt with supernatural opponents before, but these are highly disciplined combatants that are trained to use everything at their disposal. Now, there is a fighting style that could help non-Force users take on Force users like Jedi or Sith, but it's called Teräs-Käsi. Teräs-Käsi was a fighting form designed for non-Force users in order to combat Force users. But these guys would not be trained in Teräs-Käsi, so using CQC against Jedi just wouldn't work. I mean, CQC only works when you're like literally up close. So as long as the Jedi kept their distance, then CQC is completely useless. So I don't think either one would really stand much of a chance against a Jedi. And they damn sure wouldn't stand a chance against a Sith. I mean, I would say, without question, Darth Maul would kill Big Boss and Solid Snake quite easily. Heck, he could probably take them both out at the same time in their prime. So yeah, I don't think CQC would be very effective. Your next question comes from a newbie going by the name of Clayton Reed, and you want to know which is more ridiculous, a hero who can come back from the dead or a hero that has so much power that he becomes unrelatable. I guess the number two. I don't think it's so ridiculous if you have a hero who can come back from the dead. That's not really ridiculous. I mean, I think there's some heroes who would like that because that ostensibly makes you immortal. But to have so much power that you're unrelatable, I think is a pretty hard thing to do because even godlike superheroes have some qualities about them that are relatable. Maybe not to yourself, but there's someone out there that they certainly could relate to. So if you're not relatable to someone else, period, then I think that is kind of ridiculous because as unique as we would all like to be, we all have something in common. I don't really think that there's anyone in the world that can't say that they have even one thing about someone else, even someone that you don't like, that you have in common. And the next question comes from Joe. I'm not even going to try saying your last name because I'm really bad with last names. And you want to know, who do I think would win? Maureen from Outlander, the 2008 film, or Xenomorph? Well, Joe, I've never even heard of Outlander. So I don't even know who this person is you're talking about. So obviously I got to go with the Xenomorph in default because I know what that is. I know what they can do. So I'm going with the Xenomorph. And the last question of the episode comes from Brandon Williams, and you want to know, if I had to pick 3 games in these categories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, which games would they be? Okay, a good game. Resident Evil 4. That's a very, very good game. A bad game would be like DMC. That is a terrible, terrible game. Hate that game. Definitely in the top 10 worst video games I've ever played. Ugly games, I would have to say probably any Atari 2600 game. I mean, that's before my time of gaming. I started as more of a 16-bit era kid. But looking back at Atari games, those games are ugly. I know that was revolutionary at the time, but it's been like 30 plus years. I mean, I think we can all acknowledge that those graphics look like shit now. So yeah, I would say just any Atari 2600 game. I think those nowadays would be considered ugly looking games, even though those, they were made decades ago, so they're primitive, so you can expect that. And with that, those are all the questions for this episode. I'd like to thank everybody for sending in your questions for this episode. If you would like me to answer your questions for episode 245 for next Friday, be sure to type them in the comments down below, but make sure you get them into me before next Wednesday, before I start filming this. Like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I will see you next time.